I don't want to record. Jet.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Theresa Kozar. I'm the Adult Services Librarian here at Dare County Library. Welcome to the Dare County Extension Master Gardeners Winter 2024 Garden Series. Today's topic is pruning. And please remember to hold any questions that you have till the end of the presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Gemma.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Flipped on here. I guess I can just hold it too, huh? Or just, I can't, I thought I could do it, but I can't see where I'm clipping it.
Totally understand. You should be fine that way.
Okay, great. Well, once again, I would say also welcome and happy Valentine's Day in the beginning of Lent for some of us. And this is a presentation on pruning basics. My name is Gemma Green. I've been with the Master Gardeners. I can't believe it. It's going to be 10 years in April. Time flies when you're having fun. And this is pruning basics, and hopefully for those Master Gardeners in the back there that it's a reminder, refresher of proper pruning techniques. I know when I was going over and putting this together, there's a couple of things that I know I do wrong, and it reminded me, the right way to do it. What we will be talking about today, give you a sort of working definition of what pruning is. I think we can figure that out. But more importantly, reasons for you to be pruning. Go over pruning tools. Again, you probably know what your pruning tools are, but there's some little hints there for the right way to use them. Talk about the types of pruning. There's 5 basic kinds of pruning techniques, the best times to prune. And for most plants, there's a specific time. Some, of course, there's exceptions. And some tips for pruning specific kinds of plants. And as Teresa said, if you have a particular plant you're worried about or want to know about, you can hold that to the end. That would be great. So what is pruning? It's best defined is the selective removal of specific plant parts. So it's just not doing anything and cutting up your plants. And it's probably the gardening technique that is misunderstood, incorrectly practiced. For a lot of cases, lots of times we wait too long because we're afraid to prune and then it gets out of hand, or we feel, gee, I have to prune. Hey, it's the end of February. This is the time to prune a lot of things. And you think it's February, I'm going to be out there pruning away, and you may not have to. So hopefully, we'll give you some ideas about when is the right time and what you should be pruning. So let's look at the reasons why we prune. Um, First of all, we want to train our plants, in particular when they're young, because if you do it when they're young, it makes it a lot easier as you go along, as the years go by. Um, it helps keep them healthy, believe it or not. It's a really important thing to do. And it can improve the quality of the plant, ties into the healthiness of it. And fourth, it's frequently necessary to keep your plants in bounds, although I say that with a caveat as we go along here. And I'd like to go over these in a little more detail. So, training your plants. As I said, it's good to start when your trees are young or newly planted, obviously. And that first pruning, as you look at your, let's say, a tree, um, keep in mind what's sort of the natural shape of that tree. So you really want to follow along those lines. I'm a big proponent myself. I'm not much into really formal kinds of looks. I know some people are and some people like that. It's a lot of work. So I think sort of the natural shape, you think of the way it's supposed to be. And what you're really going to be limiting your pruning to is maybe you see a damaged branch or branches that are crossing. Those are what you're going to look for in that first pruning, because you want to make the tree or shrub or even a vine stronger, and pruning can help do that. Um, you really don't want, as I mentioned, to remove these weak and damaged branches, but you don't want to be too aggressive with this. The sort of rule of thumb in pruning is at the most removing up to about 30% of the plant. Um, I'll mention later on if it's really overgrown, it's a big older plant, you may want to go up to maybe 50%, but that really depends on the plant itself. But especially with young plants, if you do much more than 30%, not only are you doing, remember you're cutting into a living organism, and you're injuring it. And if you do too much of that, you can kill it. So you want to be um, a little less aggressive with it. And so that's the first pruning. The second pruning, probably within a year or so. Again, you want to address sort of serious problems. The picture up there, and I know I can't actually point to it, but you'll see it's a really tight crotch there. It's called a V crotch. And that's something that you would probably be looking to get rid of. So, um, you know, you want to that second and then really subsequent prunings. Really, you want to maintain what your desired shape is. And as I said, you can go really formal. And I know in some, especially with container plants, a lot of people like that look. Um, I know maybe I'm a lazy gardener. It's a lot more work, but it looks really beautiful. I like more the sort of natural look where it's open and airy myself, but you can go either way with as you're training your plant. Um, as far as maintaining plants' health, said this, and I'll say this several times over the course of this presentation. Um, you're really looking to get rid of like dead branches, dying or disease. You see, oh, this doesn't look right. Those are the things that you want to be looking at and getting rid of them. Um, they're definitely entry points for diseases or insects. And you want to get rid of that because it can spread very quickly to the rest of your plant. And obviously, you don't want to do that. The other thing, when you think about maintaining the health of your plants, you want to get air and light into the whole plant, the interior of the plant. And because that's what keeps it growing and healthy and full. So as you're thinning and pruning, think about that. Think about which way you are, which branches you're going to do. It shouldn't just be, go out there and chop everything down. It really should be a deliberate kind of thing. And again, less is more, definitely with this. And I think in particular, if you have a flowering bush or a flowering tree, um, you want to get that air and light into the interior so that it stays healthy and it has the flowers or fruit. For example, figs are, a great one for pruning. So those are as you're, again, it's a deliberate thing that you want to be doing. It improves plant quality. What does that mean? Well, pruning, what you're doing is instead of having the growth energy of the plant go to grow it bigger, what you're doing is diverting that growth energy into either greater yields of fruit like the grapes up there, or I mentioned figs. I know when I started pruning my fig tree, it increased the yields greatly. It also produces stronger stems. If you grow pussy willows or some of the dogwoods, definitely pruning makes them stronger, more vigorous. Um, for clematis, there are kinds of clematis nowadays that have two flowerings. And I know from experience, you don't get that second flowering unless you do some pruning. So that's great. And I think a lot of us have American beauty berries down here because they grow so well. Um, Definitely pruning increases the looks and that great magenta, bright red coloring of them. So definitely improves the quality of them as far as restricting growth. And I would say sort of the first thing you think about is plants that are going to fit into your landscape, into this, the place that you want to put them. Think of what size they're going to be 5 years from now, not just when you plant that little bush or that tree. And so if you have small space, like I have a very small yard, you sort of think of, as much as I'd love to have a really beautiful live oak growing there, it's going to take up a lot of room. Maybe I should think of something dwarf size instead of a bush rather than a full grown tree. You know, Vines just kind of grow forever. They look really nice when you start out, and then they're who knows where, 20 feet from where you begin. And I'll mention this briefly here, but talk about it more. One thing to keep in mind, yes, it does keep the plants in bounds, especially if you have walking paths or even your driveway or maybe out into the street. You can keep them in bounds by pruning, but it also invigorates your plants. So you might get more growth. So you have to, again, it's the whole idea of being a little more deliberate about what you prune. So again, this idea of blocking visibility. Pruning tools. I'll try to go over this pretty quickly because I think most people are familiar with a lot of the pruning tools. Just a couple of things about hand clippers or pruners. I think we probably use these more than anything. There's two styles of them. You may have noticed this already. Um, there are anvil style as well as bypass. Personally, I think the bypass is what you want to use. The anvil, there's a cutting blade at the top, and I wish I could point, but the top, but the bottom part of it, if you have one of these, it's sort of a soft plate on the bottom. And what you're doing, you're cutting the top of the branch or the stem, but you're crushing the bottom. And so it's not making quite as a clean cut as you will get with the bypass pruners, which are like scissors, they cross each other, and you get a cleaner cut. On the other hand, in most cases, anvils can be a little bit cheaper to buy if you're not wanting to spend a lot of money. Um, and in some cases, they're lighter. So if you have, like me, getting arthritis in my wrists, they are lighter to use than the others. So, I'm not saying that they're bad to use, but that's just the difference between them. Loppers, um, you know, they have a shorter blade, longer handles, obviously, so you can reach up and get branches that are overhead. Some of them do have telescoping handles where you can, pull them out so you can get up higher. And this is my sort of my first of two warnings that I say, be careful when you're using these tools because you're cutting overheads. Things fall down when you're like working overhead. Um, Suggest that you wear some kind of head protection, definitely eye protection because things can fall in your eyes. And sort of the thing to say is if you have to climb a ladder to cut a branch, I would strongly urge you not to do it. Really think about hiring a professional at that point because, again, it can be very dangerous. And want everybody to be safe. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later too. But definitely think about that. If it's just, oh, it's a little bit out of reach, I'll get, you know, just get that old ladder out. Urge you not to do it. Wear that eye protection. Also, it's probably best to have someone else with you when you're pruning again, so you can get hurt. You don't want that to be something bad. Pole pruners. Obviously, you're moving up in the where you can cut things. Pruners, these kinds of pole pruners can help you get further up. They can be very heavy, so think about the materials that they're made of. If you don't have a lot of, I know I don't have a lot of upper body strength. Um, we have an old one with a wooden handle. It's very, very heavy. There's two types of these. There's the kind that just have the blade at the top and the lanyard that you pull down to operate, or ones that just have the saws that you're actually sawing back and forth. Again, like with the loppers, when you're working overhead, wear eye protection, hopefully wear some kind of head protection as well, work with somebody, and um, think of, again, I said that like the wooden ones are heavy. There's other materials that can get fiberglass or plastic even, which I think is probably a better material. Some of them have aluminum handles, but if you have that conducts electricity. If you have overhead wires, again, you're reaching up, and you'll see there's diagrams of how to where to cut plants as we go along here. And it looks like it's so easy to get in there, but you and I know that trees and shrubs grow close together. So sometimes you're getting in there, you're not seeing real well what you're getting into or going overhead. Please be careful as you're doing this. Saws, another thing that you have to be careful with. These are all hand saws, and I definitely, again, if you think you need to use a chainsaw on something, I say get a professional to do that. Don't do it yourself. Um, just regular saws, yes, definitely. And um, like think about like 2 inches in diameter, 1 3/4 to 2.5 inches that you want to use a handsaw with is for the diameter of the branch that you're going to cut down. Um, if you have something like a really that like that V crotch that I showed you the earlier, um, you probably want to go with something like the saw that's shown on the bottom that has that curve. It's thinner, um, and you can get in because sometimes with saws, as you're sawing, it can rip the bark off of the plant, and you're creating a bigger wound. Takes longer to heal, more entry points for those diseases and bugs. So, you want to kind of look at different kinds of saws and um, the tools that you were using. Head shears. I don't have a lot of hedges myself, so don't use them all that often, but I can say that electric head shears, if anybody has ornamental grasses, and this is a good time also to be cutting them down. I don't know if you really call it pruning, but um, these work wonderfully. It's so much easier than trying to do it with the hand ones. You can get right through them. Um, and the final tool that I'm going to talk about is a wood rasp. And it's not something I, at least personally, thought of as a tool for pruning. Think more of it like sharpening my tools. But as I mentioned, that anvil pruner, you get that one ragged edge. This is great to smooth it out, and you get a neater cut. It'll heal faster. So keep that in mind. As far as taking care of your tools, um, goes without saying, you want to keep them clean and you want to keep them oiled. As far as keeping them clean, you really should clean them after you're done using them. But if you're cutting, let's say, your rose bush has some, black spot or other kind of disease, I'll give that as an example. You probably want to disinfect it and actually disinfect it in between cuts. And a good thing to use for that would be rubbing alcohol, 70% strength rubbing alcohol instead of thinking about like using bleach because that's really corrosive and you're putting it on metal. You don't really want to do that with your tools. As far as once you clean them, you probably want to oil them and very simply an oily rag, wipe them off. And obviously you don't want rust forming. You can, either use mineral oil or something like WD-40 or Barstol. They're all great oil products. You want to keep your edges sharp. If you start out using a good oil stone and just take a couple of swipes once you're done cleaning it and do that and then oil it. That should keep it in pretty good shape. and and I say about using them properly. We were talking a little bit before we got started here, and I know I am very guilty of, I mentioned with saws about how, the diameter of the branch you're cutting. With loppers, they say like 1 inch to 1 1/3 inches to use them on, and sometimes it's a little bigger branch and you get up there and you put it and it's like and you start turning. It's really a bad thing to do because you're spreading those blades apart. So what you should be doing is making sure, first of all, the branch is further into the cutting blade. Don't use the tips of them, but get it in to where you get good leverage. And because that's going to give you once again, a cleaner cut. You're not pulling your blades apart, and definitely don't use them for anything else. I know my mother always told me this when, now this is really going to date me. Back in the day when I used to make my own clothes, the scissors that you only use them for material. Same way with your pruners and your loppers and all your other tools, only use them for pruning. Don't cut, we say wire here, but don't cut other things either, twine. It's going to dull your blades. Use them for what they're made for. Response, the plant's response to pruning. What does that mean? But if you understand like what happens when you actually cut, and you're cutting into a living thing, what does it mean to the plant itself? Think if you know a little bit about that it can help you do a better job. First of all, you do want to consider what that natural shape of the plant is, and you really want to maintain that. You don't want someone to drive down your street and say, wow, Gemma just cut down all her crepe myrtles or whatever. You want it to be really inconspicuous for the most part as you do your pruning job. Just you know how well do you do it will help. And keep in mind, pruning stimulates new growth for that plant. So as I said, with vines, you have to be very careful with, but this is really with any plant. The terminal bud, the bud at the end of the branch that you're looking at, is, produces a hormone that actually inhibits the growth of the other buds further down on that branch. So you're pruning, you're clipping off that terminal bud. What that means is it allows those other ones to start growing. So keep that in mind when you are doing this, because it'll stimulate, within about a foot of that cut, those other buds. So keep that in mind as you're thinning and pruning, that's going to do there. And definitely how and where you cut makes a big difference. We say, and it's easier to say that than actually do this in a lot of cases, the cut should be no more than a 45-degree angle. Because if you make it much bigger than that, obviously you're making a bigger wound in your plant. It takes longer to heal. It should be at an angle, not necessarily straight across. And you should go back to about a quarter of an inch to a half an inch. Again, it's easier to, say those measurements than when you look at your plant to do this. But you want to cut back to a bud or another branch is what you're looking for, and you want to, be within that distance. So if you just kind of do it at random, again, since it's going to stimulate growth, you might get a lot more growth where you're trying to thin out things. So think about that as you're going through. And once again, another reminder about young plants: don't be over aggressive. This is really that. I think that's true for most plants. Don't no more than a third of it. As far as the types of pruning, there's sort of 5 basic types that we look at: pinching back, thinning, heading back, renewal or rejuvenation pruning, and finally shearing. And just showing the 2 pictures, one in earlier spring and one later spring, that it does make a difference as you prune. You do get more flowers. It looks a lot better. And just to go over each one of these, pinching, probably the easiest way to do this, all you're doing is literally with your fingers pinching back that soft green portion of the plant. And, but again, do it with some discretion. Think about how you're doing it. If you do this, um, it probably will save you a lot. It's easy to do. As I said, most of the times you can do it just with your fingers. Um, and again, you're directing the growth. Thinning. And I think this is the one thing we think of mostly when we think about pruning, that we're thinning things out. Um, and again, you're going for that more open plant so that it gets that air and light into the interior of it. Um, you're going to cut branches off, and you can see in the diagram they're showing it's going all the way back to um, either the main trunk or the main side branches. And I always, when I look at these diagrams, it makes it look so very easy because it's always open and airy, and you can get in there and you know exactly which ones you want to cut. But when you look at the magnolia there, you know that there's a lot more branches in there and you're really looking at it. So it sort of rule of thumb, you want to look at old branches, maybe the ones that stick out the most. You again, look at your plant. If something is way out here, you probably want to get rid of it. And you do want to cut it back. You don't want to leave. And there's a great picture later on. You don't want to leave this long stub hanging out there. The kinds of plants that you do thinning on a lot, especially down here, you see crepe myrtles get great for thinning out, magnolias, verbenums, another great plant. But if this is all you're going to do, you're going to end up with a very spindly looking plant. So in most cases, what you want to do is do two things at the same time. You want to do some heading back. Examples of this in particular, crepe myrtles, you'll see that they will cut them all back, that you're cutting off the terminal, the tops of them, and they cut them back, and it has that dense growth. Do you really want to do that? What you end up with is, in the diagram A, is that it gets very full at the top, not anything at the bottom. If you combine heading back with thinning, you get a much fuller kind of tree or particular bush. I think you do this a lot in because it's it's stimulating that growth. It keeps the undersides of it. You're letting the air and the light into that. Um, and really keep in mind, once again, it's the shape of the plant, that sort of natural shape that you want to go for. Also think of, as I said, you're cutting back to a healthy bud. Think which way that bud is facing on that branch. Is it facing inward? Is that where you want that new growth to go? Or is it facing outward? Do you want it to grow out? In some cases, plants are great. They have the buds right on opposite sides of that branch. Think of, again, which way you want it to grow. And you should take off one of those, let's say the inner one, if you want it to grow more to the outer edges, or the outer one if you want it thicker to the middle. Because if you leave both of them there, one of them is going to decide it's going to be the leader, and it's going to get bigger. It's going to fork. The other one's going to be a weaker branch, and you may have to come back and do some more thinning, cutting that. So look at the buds as you're doing it. Rejuvenation, basically what you are doing in these cases is removing them all the way down to the ground. You see this a lot in forsythia. People cut them all the way down, and um, basically plants flower better on newer, vigorous branches. So you're getting rid of all those old branches. Abelia is another good plant that you can cut all the way down to the ground and get those newer branches growing up. And as I mentioned, you want to remove the older branches near the ground. And if you need to sort of look at what is coming up or the branches that you may want to leave, if they're very thin, maybe like a pencil as far as thinness, you might want to cut those back as well. Shearing is that when you're taking those hedges back, you're cutting off all those terminal points of, of your plant. Keep in mind that it's making them grow more on the edges. You're not letting that light and air to the inner part of the plant. So it's going to die back. If you like that look, obviously here's a very, very formal garden. Certainly you can do that, but it's really more that very formal kind of look when you're shearing. It's not for everybody. It takes a lot of work, so keep that in mind. And it depends on the look that you want to get. As far as timing, and that's probably one of the most important factors to think about, especially if you have flowering or fruiting plants that you want to deal with, you are dealing with. If there's something, we had a lot of wind earlier this week. If you had branches that came down or didn't come down the whole way and they're broken, definitely you don't have to really think about timing as far as getting rid of those kinds of things. Do it. The sooner you do it, in fact, the better off you are. Because obviously it'll make your plant look better, and you don't want to have that damaged branch hanging overhead. As far as the severe pruning, and I always hesitate because I know in some cases there are plants you really want to cut back. As far as timing of it, if you're going to do this, and when I say severe, that's removing like maybe half the plant. Seems like really a lot, but this is the time of year to do it. You want to do that kind of pruning this time of year. The key for flowering shrubs is think about when they bloom. So if they're going to bloom, if they bloom normally in the spring, azaleas are what comes to my mind right away, is you want to prune them really shortly after they have flowered, because they're going to be forming their new buds, flowers. Shortly after that, they start doing this. If you wait too long, probably much beyond July, beginning of July, you're cutting off next year's blooms and you won't get as many. If they bloom in the summertime, now's the time to do the pruning. So think of what kind of plants you have. Spring flowering, do them after the fades. Summer flowering, doing them late winter. I think that's the best advice that I've ever gotten as far as pruning is thinking about that. Like to look a little more in depth with either deciduous or evergreens, and just quick reminder, deciduous are the ones that lose their leaves in the fall, and evergreens because they're losing their leaves all year round, basically, stay green looking. Um, and touch on looking at trees and roses, conifers, a little bit about vines. Um, and, getting into, I s- nah. Once again, if you're in particular about pruning trees, since they're going to be big and overhead, um, that's something that you really, really should consider hiring a professional. Um, and if you are hiring a professional tree service, um, make sure they're certified and insured. You know, lots of times guys just sort of drive around with their trucks. Yes, I can cut that down for you, but you want to make sure they know what they're doing as well. Um, ask for references, and if at all possible, you probably want, especially if you have a tree that's a beautiful specimen, you want to use an arborist. I think we now have a few here on the Outer Banks. We didn't for a while, but arborists, they're trained, um, more so dealing with trees. They're certified. They know what they're doing. And in fact, they have to pass a test to um, call themselves an arborist. So I think it's really important. Once again, if you have to get that ladder out to do it, to get a professional to do it. As far as pruning trees, again, I feel like a broken record, but it is best to start when they're young. I know that, hey, you move into a new house, they already have trees growing, and the branches are reaching onto your decks. And um, I don't know if recently you saw the article that was in the local newspaper about roof rats. They travel from trees onto into your house. So, you might want to think about cutting some of those kinds of things back. Um, Again, you don't want to do any more than that 30%, that rule of thumb, when you cut them back. Um, Over time, if you think the thinning out really doesn't decrease the size of the tree, you're just letting that air and light into the tree so it stays healthier. Um, those lower branches, if they're getting in the way of maybe you walking through your yard, or they're hanging over your neighbor's yard, you may want to get rid of them. And you see this frequently, especially in cases like that, that people just kind of cut that branch off right at that fence line, and you have this long stub. Um, that's not what you want to do. Definitely deciduous trees, older trees, you want to prune them when they're dormant. This time of year is a great time to do it. Um, and as far as, smaller branches, you're probably going to be using a lopper on this. And again, you want to make sure you're doing that 45-degree angle, um, and you're cutting no closer than a quarter of an inch um, back to a branch. And again, you want to direct that growth energy into that other branch. Um, Another thing you want to cut out on deciduous trees is crossing branches. I don't know if you can see real well with the picture, but the one branch is rubbing onto the other, and it's definitely causing a wound to the other branch. You want to cut that one back. And if it's going to be a bigger branch, and that's when they say bigger branches, it's not all that big. They're talking maybe 1.5 to 2 inches, think in that range. Um, definitely recommend doing what's called a 3-cut method. And the reason you're doing this is you want to keep from tearing the bark. So basically, the first cut you're going to do is about 1 to 2 feet out from the main stem of the tree. You're cutting underneath it, and just about halfway through. The second cut is on the top of that same branch, maybe an inch, maybe up to 2 inches, even a little bit closer, maybe, a half an inch. Again, you're cutting halfway through. And what happens is basically the weight of that branch is going to break it. Then the third cut is where you're going to cut back to what's called the branch ridge or the branch collar. And it's always, again, when you show it on a diagram, it looks so easy. But lots of times it's hard to tell where that branch ridge is. And this diagram, I think it shows it a little bit better. If you kind of draw an imaginary line, like from the tree trunk, if you draw it straight up, you can go like a half, a quarter an inch to half an inch out from there. It helps it. And what you want, how you want your branch to heal is you see the one, it forms like a donut around it. That's a nicely cut branch. And this is a great picture because it also shows the wrong way to do it. The branch that's sticking out this way, that's pretty long, definitely has not been cut correctly. It hasn't healed at the top, as you can see. It didn't form that nice little donut around it. It's not a great way to do it, and you really can see the differences, like right there, one to the other. And it's definitely, as you get into thicker branches, you want to make sure you're doing that. Again, please be careful as you're doing this. The other thing I would caution you, it used to be they would say to put that pruning dressing on the cuts, and new research has shown that not only doesn't that help, it can actually hinder the healing process of your plant. So please do not use it. As far as shrubs, believe it or not, most deciduous shrubs, verbena is a good example, they don't need a lot of pruning. But again, they flower best on those new, young, vigorous branches. So if you are going to be doing any pruning, you're going to think about, thinning, heading them back, getting rid of the older branches. Um, Definitely, you might have, like I said, inherit a shrub that's really growing out from how you want it to be. You can go up to maybe 50%, but keep in mind, it's going to take at least a couple of seasons for that plant to recover. So think about, do you really necessarily have to cut it back that far? You want to, again, remove those older branches. Think about what you're doing as you do it. Mentioned beauty berries earlier. That's one exception with shrubs not needing a lot of thinning. They need a lot of, cut them down to the ground. I didn't believe this when I first started with Master Gardeners, and they said, nope, cut them down. It's like, I'm going to kill my beauty berry that I've been nurturing along. It will help it. You'll get much more in the way of berries. Hydrangeas, there's always questions about when should I prune my hydrangea. First and foremost, know what kind of hydrangea you have, because there are two different kinds, and it really, some of them bloom on new wood. For example, the smooth hydrangeas, and they should be pruned back this time of year in late winter. They bloom on what's called new wood. And so you want to, before those flower buds form, you want to prune them back. But others bloom on old wood. If you have big leaf hydrangeas or oak leaf hydrangeas, two examples of that, they should be pruned in the summer. Once they're finished blooming, that's the time to prune those. So know what kind you have. I would say with the big leaf, don't prune them back after August. Once you get into August, late summer, they're already forming their new buds, and you're going to be cutting them off. So if you know, and obviously, look at the time of year that they're blooming for you. Once again, roses, you do a little bit different than the other ones, and I'm really talking about shrub roses. They take two prunings for the most part. Early spring, you want to prune them back to 3, 5. They say 3 to 5. You can go 6 if they look nice and healthy. You want to cut back if you're cutting off dead canes. Get into like a good inch into the healthy green part of the cane. And since roses are definitely notorious for having diseases, if they're, I always say this with tomatoes when we're talking about vegetables. If there's a disease a plant can get, a rose will probably get it. So you want to definitely, this is where you're going to be disinfecting in between cuts as you're cutting back. And I would suggest make sure that you clean up all your clippings, because that can stay in the soil if you don't. And you have this cycle of diseased roses again. You also do a fall pruning, but it's a really light pruning. You're just taking, sometimes you have canes that, again, you have that one that's, whoa, way out there somewhere. You want to cut that back. That rule of thumb again, a third of it you really want to cut back. So it's a very light pruning in the fall. Again, that's just showing, leaving 3 to 5 canes. Actually, it drives me crazy every time I looked at this because they're actually showing 6 in the picture. So as far as evergreens, as conifers, really, they don't need as much pruning. Just a couple of things that I do want to mention. Lots of times, conifers, pine trees end up with 2 trunks. You definitely want to get rid of one of them, so you have one strong leader. It makes your tree much healthier, stronger. Again, you're pruning back the same as you would with a deciduous tree, back to the trunk, back to the main part of the stem. When you do it is, you don't have the same kind of restrictions. You want to prune them when they're dormant, so to speak. But this time of year, a lot of people are doing their pruning, so you want to think about that. One thing I would point out, I know pines get what's called candles. That's the new growth oil, and then you see them this time of year. If you want to make your pines thicker, more dense, if you pinch that off about half, and literally they look like they would be hard, but in most cases you can just pinch them off. It will make it fuller. What they call broadleaf evergreens, and that can go anywhere. It's just not pine needle kind of thing that think of like a Japanese holly or pyracantha. They stay green all year. again, they don't need much in the way of pruning. And, as far as timing, again, early spring is a good time to do it, but if there are, that broken branch or whatever, you want to get rid of it. Um, I would say one thing you would have to be careful for something like a pyracantha. Obviously, you're growing them for the berries. They look great this time of year, and they grow from old wood. So really, once the flowers fade, and you kind of have to look for the flowers. This is the same way with hollies. They have very tiny little flowers. So once they fade, you want to prune them then, because you don't want to get rid of all those berries that are being produced with them. Other broadleaf evergreens, you can again cut them back maybe 50%, but it's going to. So, be discreet when you do it. There's, again, shrubs, just mention it once again, things like azaleas and rhododendrons bloom in the spring. So you want to prune them right after the flowers fade, because you really don't want to be removing them. As far as like junipers, and use ciders. I need a drink already. It's that maintenance pruning, the damage you want to get back. And again, you don't want it to be conspicuous with these kinds of things. For the most part, you're growing them as ground covers. So if you kind of shear them all off, um, they're going to look kind of odd. You also don't want to cut back into where there's bare branches, because they're not going to be growing back anymore, and you're going to end up with just a stub. So be careful with it. You really don't want to do any kind of severe pruning with these kinds of conifers. Hedges, since I've said it several times, I'm not personally crazy about real formal kinds of things, but one thing you might want to keep in mind is with hedges, you want to keep the top part a little narrower so that light and air gets on the bottom, so they don't get spindly looking. Bigger than the bottom. And the difference between the formal that you have to do constantly and the informal can save you a whole heck of a lot of time. Vines are very similar to what we've already discussed. You definitely are pruning to direct growth. I mentioned about clematis because they do have these twice flowering ones. You can prune them back this time of year so you get that first flower. And then after that fades, again, you want to do maybe back a third so you get that second flower, because it won't do it unless it has both of those. So very briefly, talked about why we prune, from training a young plant to maintaining the health and the structure of the plant, restricting growth to a certain extent. Talked about tools, the kinds of pruning, which, the pinching, heading back, thinning, renewal, shearing, and the difference with, when your plant flowers, think about that again. And some tips for, specific types of plants as we went through it. So questions? Yes.
When was the pruning cut back for small crepe myrtles and large crepe?
Sure. That's right, for the people on Zoom. Is there a difference between smaller crepe myrtles or the larger crepe myrtles about when to prune them? Not really. This is a good time of year to do them, both of them, because it's before they bloom. And, again, you're looking for those crossing branches. I know a lot of people do just the heading back and cut them all the way. Yeah, again, it's a look. If some people like that, I won't.
Is that healthy?
No, it isn't. It isn't, because you're doing a lot of, yes, yeah. They do have trained arborists there, and they've trained them that way. I wouldn't do it on mine. It's a lot easier to keep them healthy without doing that.
You heading back now on crepe myrtles or not? Is it safe to do that heading back now?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say anybody's wrong with doing it, but it's not a recommended practice. Let me put it that way.
But it's, yeah, but
No,
it's
it's not.
necessary if you want to maintain a view. Because some of them can get real tall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just controls it.
Yeah.
Wanted to ask about oleander.
Oleander, this is a good time. Again, you might want to cut out the dead ones. This is probably as far north. Of course, now we never know since they've changed the zones. We've always said this is as far north as oleander will grow. So we get like frost damage. You can cut that back, and this is a good time to do it. Yeah, yeah, I would not do any more than that. Yeah. And I know you had a question.
Couple hawthorns that are dragging. Can I cut them way back or?
Yeah, sorry. As far as Indian hawthorns, if they're scraggly and you want to cut them back, would,
Well, they're kind of in front of our house and facing south. They get more sun. But there's also hawthorns there that are beautiful. Because I have two that are in the middle that just are scraggly.
Are they really
That-
scraggly?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm trying to
do.
think, I don't know why they would be if the other ones are healthy.
other than if they're, not getting as much light in with it.
And they're fighting for water and they're fighting for nutrition with the other.
Are they older? Are the trees
They're all
older?
about the same.
Yeah,
But remember, you're gonna lose the blue.
Yes.
yeah, that's, I was saying,
After they bloom.
How far back?
I wouldn't do it any more than that 30%. I mean, I tend to really be on the side of less is more when you're pruning things back. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Okay, we did, when do you prune oleanders? And this is a good time. And I would, and I would also caution you, they produce a stuff. Yeah, stuff. I don't know what else, the juice. So definitely wear long sleeves when you do it, because it can cause contact dermatitis from it. They're also, they say they're poisonous for pets. And so I would definitely be cleaning up. When and how to prune pampas grass. Oh, this is also a hard one to say. Cut it back. Use those electric hedge clippers. That's the best way to do it. And you definitely have to do it on a, like, I would say annual basis if you want to keep them, because they die out in the middle. If you don't, well, they'll do it anyway, but and they're next to impossible to dig up. I know Chris can give you personal experience of it.
It's a job. Yes, it is. And, cut it down, tell them you cut it down to the ground.
Yeah, that's, and then this is the next question.
Yes.
Now, yes, definitely. And
All ornament, all ornament.
yeah, all ornamental grasses. And you definitely want to go pretty low with them. If you wait too long, what happens is that the ornamental grasses, you'll see like they'll all be like have flat edges on them. And, you know, they're growing and they're fine, but it just looks a little odd. But it's because they've already started their growth and people are cutting the new growth off. In what direction should you cut to make new growth grow in the direction you want? Definitely you're cutting back to those buds and you're looking on which side of the branch the bud is growing on. And if you want it to grow towards the interior, definitely that's the one you want to cut back to. If you want it to spread out, and I know people on Zoom can't see me do my, my motions, you want to cut back to one that's facing outward. The ones that are like two buds together, and I know many plants do this, they have two buds that are, you know, on both opposite sides. You want to get rid of one of them. You want to cut back to it like 1/4 of an inch above it and get rid of one of them if you want it to grow, because you're going to get this fork that in the branches, and it's going to, one of them is definitely going to be weak. So you want to get, you know, rub it off. Usually they're pretty easy to rub off. And what time of year do you cut beauty berries to the ground? Again, this is the time of year to do it. I know we had those, we start getting those warm days, you know, where what, Saturday, I think it was 70 degrees. You definitely want to do it this time of year to cut them back. Anything else?
Extremely big azaleas, probably 20 years old, big, like they need to be cut back. If I like prune now, like shape them down some, would they not? That's right.
You're absolutely right. They will, the azaleas, wait until the flowers, yeah, yeah.
Flowers fly off.
Right, wait till, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, then you would, that's when you definitely want.
Probably like
Um,
May.
I would say May, I would, June, yeah, you could probably get into June. I wouldn't do it once you get into summer. Yeah, you definitely don't want, yes. What? Oh, well, we were in zone 8B. We are what, 9A now. So we've moved up a zone, warmer, definitely warmer. Yeah. Again, I would do some trimming, more than trimming this time of year that you want to cut back to those healthy canes. Wild roses are a little more difficult because they tend to sprawl. And then again, definitely when I say fall, that's sort of like, I'm not talking October, November. You definitely want to do it, I would say September, because if you wait too long, said it like, I feel like this, I apologize for sounding sort of like a broken record, but that it encourages growth. So if you wait till too late, even down here where it stays warm, but you do start getting frosts, and you can get them in November, December.
Still cut roses now if they have half-inch.
I would, yeah, I would cut back into that new growth, because lots of times with roses, the canes, like the tops of the canes die back, and you want to get into that new growth. Yeah. Pardon me? Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. If you please, if you can remember to fill out the evaluation form.